Good morning. Today, I'll discuss about the choices that Mr. and Mrs. Fisher made and the consequences it has in the story Tangerine. The novel Tangerine by Edward Bluer presents issues about parenting choices that causes sibling rivalry, sport competition, and human values. Every choice has a consequence, as we all know, and all of the characters in the book, including Mr. and Mrs. Fisher, made big and small choices that affected Paul and all of his life. Most of the major events in his life has been instigated by Mr. and Mrs. Fisher's choices, which is influenced by the way Paul thought about himself, his relationship with his family, and the transformation of his character. In the beginning of the story, Paul's flashback memory showed that Paul's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Fisher, who chose not to listen to Paul's fear about his brother, Eric, who wants to hurt him. They decimated his dread by blaming it on his visible impairments and chose not to seek the truth because they refused to see the truth. Paul may be visibly impaired, but it never disabled him. It helps to enhance his perception, where he can see everything that his parents can't or won't see. The words won't see is the key word that affects Paul's parent relationship with his older brother Eric, where they chose to give Eric more support than Paul and prevent Eric from facing consequences, causing a rift and sibling rivalry between Paul and Eric. Mr. and Mrs. Fisher also chose to lie about what happened to Paul's eyesight because they wanted to ignore Eric's wrongdoing. Instead of telling the truth, they blamed Paul for looking at a solar eclipse for too long. Paul did not remember the incident since it was too traumatizing for him that he completely blocked out the memory. He struggles with the idea that his carelessness may have caused his own eye injury, but he also believes that his parents are not telling the whole truth about the incident. Mr. and Mrs. Fisher's decision to keep the truth a secret causes Paul to be less confident and distrustful of his parents. Paul's dad, Mr. Fisher, made a term which is called the Eric Fisher football dream, because Mr. Fisher was very confident of Eric's football talents and wanted Eric to fulfill his dream of becoming a professional football player. When Mr. Fisher made up that term, he and Mrs. Fisher started focusing more on Eric's football career than Paul's soccer dream. Mr. Fisher's choice to give Eric more support than Paul and prevent Eric from facing repercussions makes Paul feeling angry and regretful toward what Eric has done to others and give Paul a major reason to stand up for himself. Miss Fisher has a tough time figuring out what is best for her youngest son, Paul, and out of her love. She has made choices not to only protect Paul, but to keep him shielded from decision-making knowledge of events and subjects that she did not want him to be exposed to. But unfortunately, it turns out that she makes the wrong choice by telling Paul's new principal at Lake Windsor Middle School, Miss Gates, about Paul's problem with eyesight and filling out an IEP form, since he is legally blind, without telling Paul. Her decision caused a significant amount of change in Paul's life. Soccer was part of Paul's everyday life and dream to compete with his brother Eric. Being able to play in a soccer team helps Paul to gain his confidence behind his brother's spotlight as a football player. Paul was angry and resentful toward his mother, Mrs. Fisher, since he was kicked out of the school soccer team due to insurance problem with IEP. As stated in the story, "Mom, you ruined my life at Lake Windsor Middle School when you ruined and turned in that IEP." Miss Fisher's decision to fill out the IEP form devastated Paul's dream and confidence. Ultimately, her choice to keep Paul out of the decision-making events clearly showed her lack of faith in Paul and limited Paul's ability to grow up. After the sinkhole incident, both Mr. and Mrs. Fisher made a choice together to let Paul move to Tangerine Middle School. It is because Paul really wanted to have a chance at playing soccer at Tangerine. As he stated in the story, "Just let me go to Tangerine Middle. Do you understand? I won't be water boy there. I'd be the goalie. Mr. and Mrs. Fisher also chose not to sign the IEP form at Tangerine Middle School so that Paul can have a start over at his soccer dream. The choices made by Paul's parents to allow Paul to go to Tangerine clearly gave a positive impact toward Paul's self-esteem and confidence. It gave him a renewed hope in his life. As Paul said in the story, the heavens has opened up for me. Every choice has a consequence, and not knowing what you will face because of another person's poor choices can be dreadful. But the consequences of those choices can make a person to grow to be more mature by learning on how to make a wise decision. Through their choices, Paul's parents influenced him in both positive and negative way. Paul learned how to cope with his brother's cruelty and his parents' unfairness and lack of support through his incredible experiences and hardships. He built his own confidence and self-esteem through soccer game and by being part of the soccer team. Paul has transformed from a shy, unconfident boy who was always hidden by his brother's shadow to become a brave hero who saved classmates from a sinkhole. His parents' choices and decisions made Paul to learn to make his own choices and to follow his gut. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.